One of my favorite things about Disney's new DuckTales reboot is how all the characters reflect each other. Specifically, how each of the three boys echo character traits found in their great uncle, Scrooge McDuck. Louie inherited Scrooge's obsession with money and treasure, Dewey embodies his lust for adventure, and Huey values the old man's wisdom. But so far, we've only seen these traits play out on the screen with Scrooge's two youngest nephews. What's Huey's relationship with Uncle Scrooge? Let's find out in the impossible summit of Mount Neverrest. More often than not, DuckTales and Disney Duck Comics focus on larger-than-life adventures. You know, quests to ancient ruins and stories that dive deep into the lore of cultures across the world. The impossible summit of Mount Neverrest, on the other hand, focuses in on a more realistic adventure: mountaineering. It might not seem like it today, but climbing peaks untouched by humanity was once one of the most bold things an adventurer could do. And even today, the idea of climbing a peak like Mount Everest is seen as an epic and dangerous undertaking. If you haven't caught on, that's where this episode gets its name. The impossible summit of Mount Everest is about two things: Scrooge McDuck's obsession with climbing an unclimbable mountain, and Huey's quest to map that mountain to earn a Junior Woodchuck badge.
I'm gonna be the first person to set foot on the top of Neverrest.
And I'm gonna be the first person to draw a picture of it!
Not only is this a pretty solid idea for a DuckTales story, but it's also a neat throwback to the kind of real-life adventures that inspired the idea of Scrooge McDuck in the first place. I like that a lot, but what I like even more is how the episode handles the subject. In the 20th century, the idea of scaling Mount Everest was seen as bold and admirable. But today, we see it in a little bit less of a favorable light. These days, the real Mount Everest is kind of known as a combination tourist and death trap. And I like that this modern perspective is represented here in DuckTales. When Scrooge and the kids get to the Mount Everest base camp, they find a tourist town with souvenirs, gift shops, and hotels. But at the same time, they stumble across the legend of George Mallardy, a famous mountaineer who died trying to reach the summit. A character loosely based on the very real George Mallory, who disappeared while trying to scale Everest in the 1920s.
We're gonna outdo that quitter Mallardy by making it to the top.
You realize there's a difference between quitting and dying, right?
Not to me.
This setup is played for laughs, but it actually does a pretty good job of touching on the very real dangers of climbing a treacherous mountain like Everest, while still respecting the cultural idea that adventure mountaineering stood for in the 20th century. And at the same time, it still mocks the tourism concerns that surround Mount Everest today.
Don't pay any attention to these tourists, my boy. Nothing but tchotchkes and cheese puffs. We are real explorers.
These ideas even play out on the story. He's so desperate to earn the accolade of being the first person to reach the summit of Mount Everest that he throws caution to the wind, shrugging off vital supplies and good advice in favor of a bravado that's almost out of character.
Certainly don't need this.
The Junior Woodchuck guidebook suggests we need at least some of this stuff.
We don't need anything but grit, gumption, and an unwavering...
And water.
This leaves Huey in a weird position. He admires his uncle for being smart, for being a seasoned explorer that knows what he's doing. But instead, he watches Scrooge make wrong decision after wrong decision, putting both his life and the life of the other kids in danger. That sounds like a pretty heavy scenario, but Neverrest has plenty of light moments too. In fact, there are two B stories here. One with Launchpad being duped into buying a ton of useless survival gear to protect himself from a fake disease called ice fever.
It can strike even the most experienced climber down in mere minutes.
But it could take several minutes to climb Neverest. Maybe longer. What do I do?
And another of Webby and Dewey seeking the ultimate thrill ride.
We're gonna sled down Mount Neverrest!
And or die trying! Woo!
Even though it's the least important story in the episode, I think this reckless sledding challenge is my favorite part of Neverrest. The way Webby and Dewey interact is just fun to watch. The two of them are just bursting with enthusiasm, and Webby's eagerness to go sledding for the first time is kind of infectious. And the quiet disappointment she has every time Dewey makes her wait a little bit longer is just the cutest this character has ever been.
Now?
I think that would technically be more falling than sledding.
As always, this episode has a ton of great jokes too. From subtle things like Webby's bucket list of life goals, I mean, who doesn't want to high-five a brontosaurus? To visual jokes, like how they aren't flying to Neverrest in the episode's opening shots, but crashed into a snowbank, waiting for Launchpad to dig them out. I also love the way Louie just bails on the adventure when he finds out there's no treasure at the top of the mountain.
There is no treasure of Mount Neverest.
Nope, Louie out! Already gone. Have fun!
That's just perfect. Even so, this episode isn't quite what I expected. The Impossible Summit of Mount Neverrest is one of the DuckTales episodes that aired out of order. DuckTales Frank Agone said on Twitter that it was supposed to be the third episode, and that it was supposed to be a Huey episode. But to me, it sort of feels more like a Scrooge episode. Don't get me wrong, we do see a lot of Huey in this episode, but the big story reveals are all about Scrooge and how he wants to relive and correct what he considers one of the missteps of his youth. In fact, he's so obsessed with this quest that he starts acting irrational, and it takes Huey to snap him back to reality.
We are violating every rule of my junior woodchuck training. This is all too risky.
Don't you go ninny on me, lad.
For some reason, it just doesn't feel like a Huey story for me. Instead, he's kind of the voice of reason in the episode. I still like him a lot in this story, but I feel like I learned more about his character from the infernal internship of Mark Beeks. But to be fair, that episode was supposed to come after this one, so my perception of this episode is probably skewed by the broadcast order. And that's a shame, because I kinda like this episode overall. I just feel like it could have dove a bit deeper into how Huey mirrors Scrooge, by admiring his uncle's experience and wisdom.
Wow, the rusty with the wisdom of experience.
Despite that, this episode somehow feels more like a traditional DuckTales story than any other episode so far. One that has Scrooge charging forward with the kids in tow, helping him along the way and making sure that their uncle stays on track. I also feel like it's kind of a thematic retelling of one of the original DuckTales cartoon's early episodes, Too Much of a Gold Thing. In that episode, Scrooge almost gets himself killed in an obsessive quest to find the treasure of the Golden Suns, and he comes down with what Mrs. Beakley calls gold fever. In Neverrest, this obsession is more about adventure than treasure hunting, but it follows the same theme of choosing glory over common sense, and relying on one's family to help you make the right decision. I wouldn't be surprised if Ice Fever is a reference to this episode either.
Gold fever? Me? Bah!
And with that, we wrap up all of my single episode reviews for Season 1. At least for now. At the time I'm making this video, DuckTales Season 1 is on a break, and we're all still waiting to find out when the second half of the season will air. If you like this review and want to see more stuff in the meantime though, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe and all of that. I have some editorials, reviews, and new content coming, both for DuckTales and non-Disney stuff. If you have any requests, hit me up on Twitter or let me know in the comments. Either way, thanks for sticking with me through all these nerdy videos, and until next time, take it easy, Internet.